It's the 18th of October 1985. A company by the name of Nintendo has launched the Nintendo Entertainment System in New York City as a test market. How Nintendo got to this point is well known. What was to come was one of the most significant events in gaming history: the end of the crash. The NES was a massive success, and over the next year and change, it would revitalize the North American gaming industry. Such is the results of a company that experimented with their console in their home country over the past 2 years. Compared to the launch of the NES, the launch of the Famicom in its first year was quite a rough ride. Nintendo had a lot of growing pains, developing all of its games in-house, as well as being forced to recall the system because of the original circuitry being garbage. As I upload this on the 40th anniversary of the North American launch, I decided to take a different direction to celebrate things. In this video, I'll be doing an overview of all the Famicom games released in its first year of operation, that being 1983. But before I get into this mess, if you think this video ended up turning out to be worth your time, please consider subscribing and sharing this video to those who you think might be interested. Any support is appreciated, and I thank you in advance if you do so. Before I get into the games, I'm going to start with a quick overview of things. The North American NES had 17 total launch games. Those 17 games would be all she wrote for the NES until a second wave of games appeared in June 1986, after the system successfully got a foothold in the US. In contrast, the Famicom had just 3 games under its belt when it debuted in Japan on the 15th of July 1983. New releases for the Famicom would be a slow trickle. By the end of 1983, it increased from 3 games to just 9. Of those 9 games, only one would go on to become part of the New York launch lineup in October 1985. A second one has some arguments against it, and I'll get to that. All the others were developed over the course of 1984 and 85, the most recent being, of course, Super Mario Bros., which had just a month to get converted and ready for the New York release. 2 of the Famicom's first 9 games would not see the light of day outside Japan. Everybody else would get a release on the NES as part of the second wave in June 1986. Beyond the 3 launch titles, I'll mention the date of release for each game I introduce. With that out of the way, let's take a look and see just how differently the Famicom started compared to the North American NES. Donkey Kong. Well, I mean, this was Nintendo's most famous game prior to Super Mario Bros., so it makes sense that this would be a launch title. It's also first on this list here by virtue of being the oldest of the 3 launch titles. In fact, the Famicom's original intentions were specifically to create a faithful reconversion of their famous arcade game. The game was neutered to an extent, the cement mixer level and most of the cutscenes were taken out, but the game plays just like the arcade version, and that was the important part. Donkey Kong's legacy is pretty well known at this point, being the one game that put Nintendo squarely on the map, is considered a pioneer of the platforming genre, and is the point of origin for both the Donkey Kong and Mario franchises. However, because Donkey Kong was ported to pretty much everywhere possible by the time the crash happened, it was left behind in an attempt to not completely blow its cover when the NES debuted. The game would eventually get across the Pacific as part of the second wave of games in June 1986. There was the arcade version available for the meantime. Donkey Kong Jr. Same deal as its predecessor, the only difference is it's not as neutered as all 4 stages are intact here. Outside the fact that this is the only official Nintendo game to feature Mario as the antagonist, as well as being the first to name him outright, it's essentially an updated version of its predecessor. The big new thing about Junior is the vine mechanics, which function differently based on your approach to them. If you're grabbing 2 of them, you can climb faster, for example. Just like the original, Donkey Kong Jr. was ported to quite a number of consoles and thus was excluded from the New York launch lineup. It would, however, become part of the second wave of games to release on the NES in June 1986. In addition, both Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. would be combined to release as Donkey Kong Classics in October 1988. Much like Super Mario Bros., however, the standalone releases are much more desired. Popeye. Released at the end of 1982, this was the newest of the 3 launch titles for the Famicom. Nintendo wanted to make a Popeye arcade game initially, but had some difficulties in character depiction. Eventually, it got converted to what would become Donkey Kong. What do you know, all 3 launch titles are connected in some way. Who'd have thunk it? After Donkey Kong blew up like it did, Nintendo went back to their original intentions. This game was the result of that. The game only has 3 stages, and unlike the other 2 launch titles, has no way of jumping. You have to use the stairs to get higher up. That issue aside, your main goal is simply to pick up whatever olive oil drops while avoiding everything in sight. You can pick up the spinach to make yourself invincible, and it's the only way to take out Bluto. Like the other two launch titles, Popeye was ported to multiple systems. Unlike them, however, Parker Brothers took care of all ports. It even got on the Magnavox Odyssey 2, one of only 6 third-party titles for the system. What the fuck is this shit? Yeah, excuse me while I drink this brain bleach. Anyway, because of all the ports, Popeye was excluded from the New York launch lineup. It would, however, become part of the second wave in June 1986. Personally, I find Popeye to be the weakest of the 3 launch titles. It's still a decent arcade game for what it's worth, though. Gomoku Narabe Renju. Release date, 27 August 1983. The game's title roughly translates to 5 in a row bead game. Well, that's definitely a title if I've ever seen one. It's a video game adaptation of Go, a popular East Asian board game that's been played as far back as China's spring and autumn period. Its popularity is mainly focused in that region, so surprise surprise, this game was a Famicom exclusive. Go is essentially their version of chess, where your goal is to fence off more territory than your opponent. In this game's case, your goal is to simply get 5 stones in a row. The only major note to this game is that it's one of the few video games that Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi actually liked. But then again, he was also known to be a very skilled Go player, so that makes sense. You either know how to play Go, or you don't. Pretty cut and dry, to be honest. Mahjong. Release date, 27 August 1983. A video game adaptation of Mahjong being ported to a Japanese home console is about as common as Doom being ported onto whatever CPU is capable of handling it. Mahjong may be nowhere near as old as Go, but is nonetheless exceptionally popular in Japan. You have 14 tiles in your hand, and your goal is to create 4 sets of 3s, whether it be the same tile or in sequence. The remaining 2 tiles, known as your eyes, must be paired. Much like Go, either you know how to play Mahjong or you don't. Simple as that. Believe it or not, this game is not a Famicom exclusive. A 72-pin NES cartridge variant does exist. It was only released in Hong Kong along with the console itself sometime in 1987. As of recording this video, the number of copies of the Hong Kong version known to be running around is in the single digits. Even the NES itself is a fair rarity there. As far as I'm concerned, this makes Hong Kong Mahjong the single rarest licensed commercial release for the NES across all regions. Even the famous Gold Nintendo World Championships cartridge has nearly triple that at best. It's certainly a very interesting tidbit for a game this simple. Mahjong would also be one of the 7 launch titles for the Famicom Disk System when it launched on the 21st of February 1986. As a Japanese system, the status quo must be maintained. Mario Bros. Release date, 9 September 1983. Originally designated as a Donkey Kong spin-off, Mario Bros. Marks the beginning of the entire Mario franchise. The Famicom version in particular is notable for being the very first game developed by second-party company Intelligent Systems in collaboration with Nintendo's in-house staff. Many of the arcade game's elements, like the Ouija, the pipes, the underground setting, and some of the enemies, would be part of the framework for Super Mario Bros. 2 years later. This is an excellent port of the arcade version. Out of the 9 games I'm featuring in this video, this is easily my favorite one. The game would be ported to all 3 of Atari's home consoles at the time, as well as their 8-bit computers and a couple other places. But because it wasn't a Famicom exclusive, and possibly making sure Super Mario Bros. Gets all the attention, it was excluded from the New York launch lineup. Just like the Famicom launch titles, it would eventually get to North America as part of the second wave of games in June 1986. It would become a European launch title, however. Popeye no Igo Asobi. Release date, 22 November 1983. The title translates to Popeye's English Fun. What, you thought Donkey Kong Jr. Math was the only educational series game the NES had? Well, it almost had a second one. The game features 2 word puzzle modes as well as the 2-player word catcher. The word puzzle mode is simply Hangman with a katakana reference. Mode B doesn't have one, so it's just straight up Hangman. Regardless of origin, the words are always in katakana due to technical limitations. The word catcher mode is simply picking up the letters olive oil drops to make 5 correct words. It's a neat little game to try to teach yourself katakana, but the novelty wears off pretty quickly. Still better than Junior Math though. The game ultimately remained a Famicom exclusive. A corresponding version for North America was never developed due to the NES's technical limitations, as well as the lack of interest in learning the language outside the purposes that demand it. That and the American public was kind of worried about Japan taking over the world again. That's what happens when you keep producing shit for domestic products. Baseball. Release date, 7 December 1983. By virtue of its original Japanese release date, Baseball is the oldest game to become a launch title for both North America and the PAL territories when the NES launched over there. In addition, it was also one of the 7 launch titles for the Famicom Disk System when it released in Japan on the 21st of February 1986. Baseball in general was pretty huge in both North America and Japan, so it was a pretty easy decision to make this one of the New York launch titles. How the game plays is very simplistic. When you're pitching, A throws it towards the batter, while B throws it towards the bases. When you're batting, just hit the A button and watch that sucker fly. I kinda wish I had more to say about this game, but to be honest, the footage tells itself. There's no gimmicks or anything. Baseball is exactly what it says it is. Donkey Kong Jr. no Sansu Asobi. Release date, 12 December 1983. Oh hey, speaking of Dumpster Fire Junior Math, that just so happens to be the last game I feature in this video. The game is structured in the reverse of Popeye's English Fun. Both calculate modes are 2-player. The goal is to move around and do quick maths with single digits in order to reach the number that Donkey Kong is showing. It's only really interesting when a second player is involved. The first one to 5 chosen numbers wins. Exercise mode, on the other hand, is single player. You just pick the equation type you want to go after and solve the problems that are chosen. Compared to the Famicom release, the North American and PAL releases of Donkey Kong Jr. Math were rather questionable. For the North American release, I saw a roughly equal number of sources indicating that it was either a New York launch title or a June 1986 release. At first, I was leaning towards the latter date, on the grounds of having both the Donkey Kong connection and the fact that I know not all the black box titles released at the same time. The only way I could prove that date wrong would be if I could find a sealed test market copy, which was just a simple black sticker. Sure enough, I actually did find one. This means that it did release earlier than June of '86. If it wasn't at New York, then it certainly wasn't the Los Angeles test market, which was in February of '86. The PAL release is even stranger. The only date I could find within 1986 for it dates to the 10th of July, nearly 2 months before the NES even showed up in the first places to get it. Regardless, every source that had this game as a launch date said that it was the very worst selling one for the NES. At this point, the game's pretty much just shop fodder. As of recording this video, a loose North American cartridge is around $150 US. To be honest, if I was going to spend that much money on a loose NES cartridge, my pick would be either Mega Man 5, Bomberman 2, or Bookie O'Hare. I'll certainly get a lot more mileage out of one of those. And that's the Famicom's first 9 games, all released in 1983. Quite different from the North American release, don't you think? Unfortunately, the technical issues of the first model Famicom were being well reported at this point. Even though the Japanese New Year was a critical holiday season, the executive decision was made: recall them all. The Famicom would be decommissioned for some time, allowing Sega's technically inferior but still decent SG-1000 to take control of the holiday season. After fixing the original version's problems and then re-releasing it, the Famicom finally took off in 1984. As for new games on the Famicom, the flow remained roughly the same, going from 9 games over the second half of 1983 to 19 over the entirety of '84. It also included the system's first third-party titles, which were decent games in their own right, and the system's popularity hit a fever pitch by the end of the year. In contrast, North America's home console industry had completely cratered by this point. Its arcade industry, however, was starting to heal back up, enough that Nintendo decided to test the waters using their Versus system. Although the Versus system was a bit of a bust in Japan, it was a big success in North America, becoming the best-selling arcade platform of 1985. This gave Nintendo the confidence it needed to release the NES in New York City, as well as making it easy on themselves to pick the launch titles for it. Of the 17 games to debut in New York City, 9 of them were Versus system titles. Soccer and Super Mario Bros. Would also get Versus system conversions, but that would be a little bit later. Nintendo successfully did their work. They saw the reasons for why the market crashed, did everything in their power to not repeat those mistakes, and gave the American public a taste of what was to come. The stage was set for Nintendo Mania to take over North America. With Super Mario Bros., the Versus System arcade titles, and a certain toy robot called Rob at the helm, the NES would begin its march into the history books. Hey everybody, Eclipse14 here, thanks for watching. I hope this video was something interesting. I did consider doing all 17 North American launch titles, but with stuff going on in the background, it just became too much for me to handle. Plus, I thought this path would be more interesting. Regardless, if you liked what you saw, feel free to drop a like, and if you think my work was worth your time, please consider subscribing, it would be very much appreciated. The only way to celebrate today is to play Super Mario Bros. I think I'll do just that along with some Ice Climber.